Putting together this mini-series on the music of Paul McCartney that he has officially released over the decades, one of my goals was to be as complete as I possibly could be. And when you look at the number of albums that he has released by decade and the music that he's given us, it's pretty staggering. And I'm only talking about the official releases. I'm not going to get into the bootlegs that started around the Beatle time, and McCartney's had some bootlegs of his own stuff as well. Maybe that'll be for a future episode. But when I went back and looked at my notes, even though we've talked about so many great albums, I looked at my notes, I kept discovering there were McCartney official albums that I missed. So that's what we're going to look at in this episode. We're going to go back and pick up the ones that I missed, and hopefully then that will make this a complete mini-series. So like I said in the last episode, we can look at this episode as sort of an appendix of the albums that I missed. Ready? Let's drop the needle. With an artist as prolific as Paul McCartney certainly is, it's inevitable that I would have missed some of the albums that he put out over 7 decades. So let's start with the 1980s. In the 1980s, he released 2 albums that, some way or another, I missed. And the first one came out after he had finished McCartney 2 and was working on Tug of War. And it is a spoken word album, which is rare for Paul. And basically it is an interview that he did for a magazine called Musician. The album came out in 1980 and it's called The McCartney Interview. Paul talks about a number of things, including negative criticism of the Beatles and Wings, the way he and John Lennon had different reactions to fame and success, how he experienced stage fright during the Beatles and Wings, and he even talks about his band songs, Hi, 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 Give Ireland Back to the Irish, and his children's song, Mary Had a Little Lamb. Now, I guess you could make a case that that really wasn't the music of Paul McCartney, but it was an official album that came out. And then there was a second one in the 1980s. And this came out in 1987. And it's a compilation album, and it's called All the Best, and it's a double album. Now, the UK and US editions are a bit different, reflecting the songs that were hits in each country. The album contains tracks from the beginning of his solo career in 1970 up to 1987. It hit number 2 in the UK, but could only reach number 62 in the US. So there were 2 albums that I missed in the 80s, and I did pretty well up through 1997. And then I missed another one. And this one came about because Paul decided he was going to do a radio program for Westwood One Radio, and he titled it Ubu Jubu. The radio series ran for 15 episodes. Paul created and presented the program, which consisted of demos, live tracks, outtakes, rehearsals, and other unreleased material. The album, released in 1997, is called Ubu Jubu Ecology and was released through Best Buy stores. It was a CD, and it contained Season 5 of Paul's radio show, Ubu Jubu. Now, I can understand why I missed it. I don't have it. It only was released for 3,000 copies, so it makes it pretty rare. Another album I missed in 1998 is called Wide Prairie, and it was an album by Linda McCartney. And Paul compiled it from songs they had recorded from 1972 through 1998 and released it just after Linda had passed away. Besides Paul and Linda being on the album, Denny Lane is on it, members of Wings, and even Paul's son, James McCartney, as well. And Paul co-wrote 7 of the songs on the album, and they're highlighted on the track list here. And obviously he plays and sings on it along with Linda. The songs Paul co-wrote with Linda are The White-Coated Man, I Got Up, The Light Comes From Within, Cow, B-Side to Seaside, which, remember, Seaside Woman was a Linda single, Cook of the House, and Appaloosa. Then I did pretty well until the year 2000, when an album was released called Garland for Linda, and it was put together by a cancer-fighting organization called the Garland Foundation. And it is an album of choral arrangements, but one song was written by Paul McCartney, and it's called Nova. In 2004, Paul releases an album called Glastonbury Groove, and basically it was done for the magazine Uncut. And what it is, it's like a playlist of some of Paul's favorite songs from other artists. Each of the songs was handpicked by Paul. Interesting tracks include Brian Wilson performing God Only Knows, which Paul has said is one of his favorite songs of all time, Nat King Cole's The Very Thought of You, Chopin's Nocturne No. 2 in E-flat major, George Harrison's Marwa Blues, Donovan's Sonny Goodstreet, Fred Astaire's Cheek to Cheek, and Paul's own Calico Skies. Then in 2005, Paul releases an album called Never Stop Doing What You Love. And it is a compilation album, but although it was released, it wasn't really for resale. It was meant for the employees of a company called Fidelity Investments. And Paul is seen endorsing Fidelity Investments. So there was a lot of criticism about whether this was a smart move on Paul's part or not. There's one Wings cut on the album, Once Upon a Long Ago, that had never been released before in the US. Then between the years 2010 and 2020, I missed a ton of Paul McCartney albums, 14 to be exact. They are part of the Paul McCartney Archive series. And what he's done here is he's gone back to albums that he has released previously over the years and brought them out again as double albums, where one album is the original album and then the second one contains bonus material. So the 14 that have been released so far that I missed are Band on the Run, McCartney, McCartney 2, Ram, Wings Over America, Venus and Mars, Wings at the Speed of Sound, Tug of War, Pipes of Peace, Flowers in the Dirt, Wildlife, Red Rose Speedway, Wings 1971 to 1973, and Flaming Pie. And obviously, I expect we will see more coming out in this archive series from Paul pretty shortly. While he's releasing the archive series, Paul also releases another album in 2012, and it's called Kisses on the Bottom, but it's not the one that I talked about. This is called Complete Kisses. And besides the original 14 tracks on the original album, there are 4 bonus tracks, and then all 13 tracks from the live in Capitol Studios recording session. It hits number 3 in the UK and 5 in the US. Then the next year, in 2013, an album comes out, and it's called Let Us In Americana, the music of Paul McCartney. And it is a tribute album from a bunch of Americana musicians. All the proceeds from this album were donated to Women and Cancer Fund, a charity that was established in memory of Linda McCartney. The album contains 16 of Paul's songs. And then the last album that I missed also came out in 2013, and it's kind of a weird one. It's called Pure McCartney, but it's not the album that Paul released a few years earlier called Pure McCartney. This was a one-off recording in Copenhagen of 3 musicians with a backup band who all got together because they loved Paul McCartney's Ram album. So they wanted to re-record most of that album at this concert. And the concert happened and was recorded on Paul's 70th birthday. The 3 musicians were Tim Christine, Mike Viola, and Tracy Bonham, and they're backed by the band The Damn Crystals. A number of the songs are covers of songs of Ram, and notice the similarity in the artwork for the cover. Now, over the years, Paul McCartney has been in a number of bands and made some incredible music. starting way back in 1957 when he met John Lennon and joined the Quarrymen, and then George Harrison joined in 1958. Now the Beatles really hit their prime between 60 and then were gone by 70. And then Wings was 71 to about 79 in various incarnations. But I have to give a shout out to Paul's band that he's with now, because they've been playing with Paul McCartney for over 22 years. The band is made up of Paul Wickens. He joined McCartney in 1989 and is now the musical director of the touring group, and he plays mainly keyboards, but other instruments as well on stage. Then in 2001, Rusty Anderson and Abe Labrielle Jr. get called to work on Paul's Driving Rain album, which secured them a slot in his touring band for the tour that was going to support that. Rusty Anderson is an American lead guitarist with a lot of credit to his name. And Abe Labrielle Jr., the drummer, had never ever met Paul until the Driving Rain sessions. The new kid on the block in this band is Brian Ray, who joined the band in 2002 as a guitarist, bassist, and backing vocalist. After seeing this band live, I can tell you they are a fun band. They're very good, and they actually enjoy playing with and off of each other. Now, as a side note, you may have noticed the t-shirts I've been wearing for this mini-series on McCartney, and two of them particularly. This one, which is a representation of the British flag, but also the Abbey Road sign, and then one that I wore earlier, which is this one, which one of my viewers commented and said, that episode came out around July 4th. I see you were wearing a t-shirt with the flag on it. Well, no, that's the Abbey Road crossing. And both of these t-shirts I bought at Abbey Road Studios. And if you look inside the shirt, it says custom made in the UK, and then there's a little Abbey Road label there. Now, it was interesting because this was a store inside Abbey Road Studios, and if you haven't seen my episode where I go inside Abbey Road, here's the number for it and the link. You might want to check it out. That was an incredible experience. But being in that store, they didn't have a lot of merchandise, and what I noticed was they were really kind of downplaying the fact that the Beatles had been there. It was all abstract artwork like these t-shirts. And then they also had, and I'll zoom in on this so that you can get a better look at it, they also had these pins which have representations of the mixing board, the front of the studio, the crossing, but again, all abstract stuff, but nothing that even indicates that the Beatles had anything to do with this studio. Now, on the back, you can actually see the custom Abbey Road label that they had made for all this merchandise. Now, like I said, I was disappointed you couldn't really buy any Beatles merchandise there. But just a few blocks away at the St. John's Wood tube station, there was a gift shop there that had Beatles merchandise in it. Now, it's been a few years since I've been to Abbey Road. I don't know if the shop is still there in the studios or not. And I don't know if they're selling Beatles merchandise or not. So if anybody has been there recently and got answers to those questions, please leave them for me in the comments. I'd appreciate it. Now, as usual, I've created a Spotify playlist where you can listen to some of the songs that I've talked about in this episode. And here's the link, and I'll also put it in the comments below. Well, now we are getting to the end of that long and winding road, and I certainly have enjoyed doing this, and I hope you guys have enjoyed watching it as well. Look again at all the music that Paul has released over the decades, including the ones that I missed. Wow, that's some record. Actually, I mean, that's a lot of records. Sadly, I did not get to interview Paul McCartney for this mini-series, but I'm still hoping maybe that'll work out sometime in the future. As this year continues, and as we move forward, I'm sure we're getting a lot more music from Paul McCartney, perhaps some new music. I think we'll get stuff from the archives, maybe even some more classical music. With Paul McCartney, you never know, but I'll bet you there will be something, and when there is, I'll come back and talk to you about it. And hey, Paul, If you decide you want to do that interview, just let me know. Thanks for watching, everybody. Hope you enjoyed it. Keep a rockin'.
If you liked this episode, hit the like button, and you can also leave me a comment down below, and I'll respond to you. If you subscribe, we'll let you know when future episodes come out.